Welcome to Payoff Pitch, Action Network's Major League Baseball betting podcast. I'm Mike Calabrese, and we are going to get into everything under the sun because spring training is here, which means the start of the Major League Baseball season next month is right around the corner. And we're going to touch them all in terms of win totals, award futures, player props, long shots, division by division previews in the coming days and weeks, as well as a rotating list of hosts and special guests. So be sure to stay tuned for that. But really, we're going to zoom out from the very beginning and bring in Sean Zerillo, the incomparable Sean Zerillo, to get into all of our Major League Baseball futures, as I mentioned, the win totals, but also just kind of table set. This is a time of year to look at what's changed from the end of last season, what we can expect in terms of personnel moves, in terms of managerial switches, ballparks, teams that are going to disappoint, maybe surprise this year. And it starts with the Los Angeles Dodgers, of course, in their World Series title defense. They also have an opportunity to vie for a franchise record in wins. They'd have to get to 112 this year. So that's the top of the top, and we'll go all the way to the bottom of the barrel. Yes, I'm looking at you, Chicago White Sox. How low can it go on the south side? We'll get into that. But first, Sean, how excited are you to be back in the seat for another season talking the bigs Major League Baseball?
Oh, I'm thrilled. I spent all weekend holed up in South Jersey, moving back and forth between a hotel room and various sportsbooks and casinos, firing away at more than 100 futures bets spread across, obviously, the team futures markets, make and miss the playoffs, pennant, division, etc. But then all of our stat leader markets, working on that article right now in terms of home run leader, strikeout leader, major league hits leader. Found some really fun bets in there. Just dropped two in the Action Network app this morning that I talked about publicly. Kyle Schwarber and Trey Turner, both at 50-1 respectively in categories that I think they benefit from moving lineup spots. So in full swing for Major League Baseball right now, but really excited to give out a lot of these long shot bets that I've been saving up. Have dropped a few in the app, have dropped a few on Twitter, but we're going to be talking about more in the coming weeks. Have divisional previews coming out very shortly. Going to be talking about player props in the coming weeks. But if you want all my team futures, you can go to actionnetwork.com right now. I have my team futures preview up. And as I said, I'm working on the stat leaders preview, which is hopefully dropping shortly after this podcast is up as well.
So in the next month, we'll go through all these division previews, giving out, so many different angles to get yourself prepared to have some, long-term investments in your portfolio. But rest assured, during the season, we'll get back to our bread and butter, which means we'll have best bets for you every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. And with that, let's jump into the big themes of the offseason. I mentioned the boys in blue, the Dodgers. I'll frame it this way for you, Sean, to get things started. The beginning of the postseason, let's fast forward to October. What do you think the likelihood is that we will feel as though the Dodgers have both the best lineup and the best rotation in baseball?
Best rotation, I'd say it's very likely, just given the depth that they have. I mean, if you really look at the names in that rotation, they replaced Walker Buehler and Jack Flaherty with Roki Sasaki and Blake Snell, which I view as an upgrade, but they're also getting Shohei Ohtani back from injury, and they have several pitching prospects who were on the mend, like Dustin May, who are coming back for 2025 as well. So their rotation is absolutely loaded. Even the guys they're putting in there would probably be the number one starting pitcher for most teams in baseball. They have, I would say, 5 of the top 30 starting pitchers in baseball. So there's at least 5 teams that each of those pitchers could be an ace for. But even beyond that, they have significant depth. The lineup, I don't really see many depth pieces to replace potential losses. If you have a Freddie Freeman injury or a Mookie Betts injury or, God forbid, an Ohtani injury, I don't think there's necessarily going to be the best lineup in baseball at that point. I think there are other teams who are deeper, 1 through 9, but the entire roster that the Dodgers have built top to bottom is so much better than what it was last year. They added Tanner Scott and Kirby Yates to their bullpen. This Dodgers team is just super deep. They're much more dangerous and deeper, in my opinion, than they were last year. And as a result, I'm not super interested in taking many shots against them for the NL pennant or for the World Series. I did bet one team in particular who projected right alongside them as the best team in baseball coming into last year, which is the Atlanta Braves. The Braves have lost Max Fried. They lost some other guys. Charlie Morton went on to the Baltimore Orioles. But yeah, I think we're very likely to view the Dodgers as not only the favorite, but a considerable favorite come playoff time. But right now, the highest projection on them has them at about 26% to win the World Series, which is just under 3-1, about plus 285. Their best available odds are plus 250. So I don't even know how short that number gets come playoff time. I mean, they're 99% to make the playoffs. Like, is the number anything better than plus 150, 2-1 come playoff time and the Dodgers to win the World Series? I'd imagine they're close, to 40% implied by that point. So not going to improve much, or not going to worsen much, I should say, the odds, because it really doesn't have anywhere to go. But I also couldn't really recommend laying or taking 3-1 right now on a team at the start of the season, regardless of their safety of making the playoffs. But yeah, I'm close to 103 wins on their projection, which is roughly where I was last season. I'd say the public market last year was closer to 99 wins on them. This year, they're closer to 101, 102. So I think everybody views them as a better team. And my main takeaway is, of the Ohtani era, it's very likely that this year or next year is the best team that the Dodgers have. Probably the best team the Dodgers ever have, considering Freddie Freeman is in his mid-30s, Mookie Betts now 32, 33, Ohtani pitching again, but he's 31. So, if Ohtani gets hurt on the mound next year and he's not pitching, like, it's probably not as good of a team on paper as what they had coming into this season. So just keep that in mind. That's the corner I want to be on, is the 2025 Dodgers, probably the best team of the Ohtani era there, if not 2026.
Going from the biggest story team-wise to the biggest story in terms of player movement, Juan Soto. The sweepstakes for his services really ate up a lot of airtime and column inches, and essentially the eyes of the baseball world were on him and where he was going to land. But let's talk about a little bit of the fallout and downstream impact of him moving this offseason and what it means for other teams that didn't get him.
Yeah, I think the first is the Toronto Blue Jays. They saved up some money, and the Red Sox as well. They saved up some money to try to go after Soto. You were able to see the Red Sox reallocate it, giving Alex Bregman $40 million per year, which is a substantial average annual value, but he took a shorter term deal at a higher AAV in order to go there, as opposed to going to a place like Detroit. The Blue Jays have Vladimir Guerrero Jr. as a pending free agent this year. They weren't able to sign him to an extension in spring training. They've passed what he imposed as a deadline to talk extension. And there's a lot of rumors here about the Mets potentially going after him next offseason and uniting him with Juan Soto in Queens. Both play for the Dominican Republic. There is some sort of rapport there. Now, the Mets have a guaranteed option essentially for Pete Alonso next year that he can opt into. They can't opt out of it, but Pete Alonso can opt back into it. So there would be a little bit of a goofy roster fit for 2026 if they do try to add Guerrero, because then you'd have Soto, who's kind of a DH, kind of an outfielder, Pete Alonso, who's a first baseman, but can DH. And then you'd be figuring out where to insert Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I think Guerrero may actually play more third base this year. There's been talk about that, potentially moving him to left field at some point too. He's a big guy. I don't really see the outfield working out. Maybe third base could work out, because he did improve drastically as a first baseman. But yeah, it's the teams who had to reallocate money who were going after Soto, like the Cubs, like the Blue Jays, like the Red Sox. The Blue Jays ended up signing Anthony Santander, Max Scherzer. I think they have a decent roster for 2025, but it's not one I'm particularly excited about. And as I said, given the fact now they're not really tied down to anything in the future, it's not like they have this core built around Soto. And Bo Bichette took a big step back last year, dealt with injuries. I think there's a decent chance if the Jays start slow, you're going to see those Vlad Guerrero Jr. trade rumors pick up, like we saw with Juan Soto a couple of years ago. So Guerrero, probably the biggest potential trade chip on the board this year, and something I think is potentially likely to happen if Toronto starts slowly again. But yeah, beyond that, it was just teams having to reallocate money after saving up for Soto and being unable to land him. And the Red Sox went out and added Garrett Crochet via trade, signed Alex Bregman, probably overpaid for Alex Bregman, but there's points where your roster is competitive enough where you should be willing to overpay for certain free agents, because those negligible gains actually mean more than they do on paper. So yeah, I just think the Soto bidding, teams were just left with money in their pockets that they were willing to spend on assets that they may have overpaid for, and may not even be positioned to be using them for as long as those contracts run. Like Anthony Santander signed with this team that has Vlad Guerrero Jr., but they may not be playing next to each other in a few months.
What's interesting when you talk about free agent signings, unlike the NFL where you have a hard salary cap and more or less teams are going to fall into a pretty tight window in terms of spending. Obviously, Major League Baseball is all over the map. You also have ownership concerns. Was there any ownership group or individual that caught your eye in this offseason?
Yeah, the Padres probably lost out on Roki Sasaki due to the ownership battle that they're having right now. Their previous owner passed away. He had supposedly left the team to his wife, but his brothers have assumed control. Major League Baseball granted rights to the brothers, and now there's a legal battle ensuing between the former owner's wife and the current controlling owners, the brothers of the former owners. So the issues that they're having in terms of their ownership has probably hamstrung their budget. There's rumors that the brothers are going to try to sell the team, and as a result, they wouldn't be investing more into the roster at the current moment. But also, AJ Preller, one of the most aggressive GMs in the game, he's been flipping pieces to acquire guys like Juan Soto and Dylan Cease in recent years, and then he trades Soto out and gets prospects back for Soto. Got Michael King in that trade. King was great last year. So I think at this point, the cupboard for the Padres is a little bit barren. They have Leo DeVree, they have Ethan Salas, who are both highly decorated prospects at a young age who people think could be superstars at the MLB level. I don't think AJ Preller is going to trade those guys. And beyond them and Cash Mayfield, their minor system is actually much more shallow than it has been in years past. They haven't been able to fully reload that system yet. So I don't know if the Padres have the pieces to go out and keep flipping things. There's been rumors about them trading guys like Dylan Cease and Luis Ariz, both of whom are expiring contracts. So I'm down on the Padres for 2025, not only because I do think they're going to end up trading away pieces that are expiring contracts and not bringing in anything other than Nick Pivetta, who they got a good deal on, but also just because I don't think their ownership group is going to allow them to spend or invest more in this roster. I think, unfortunately, they may be out of that competitive window that we've seen them in for the past 3 seasons. I think they can get back there. They still have Tatis. They still have a decent core, but it's just a matter of what ownership is willing to let them do in the next few years.
So, covering college football and college basketball, we're seeing the very end of the bonus COVID years, and you have some players who are 23, 24. I think I saw a stat out there that Auburn basketball has just about the same age and experience as Oklahoma City in the NBA. So when you look at how experienced some of these teams can be and players who want to stick around longer because of NIL inducements and an opportunity to make money, that has created a special environment. Talk a little bit about how COVID has impacted the minors and prospects in general, and if that clock is kind of expiring now and we're getting back to more business as usual pre-COVID.
Yeah, there was no minor league season in 2020. There were expanded rosters. There were taxi squads. There was a lot of games happening on the backfields, but no true minor league development for that entire year. And in the subsequent seasons, there was a backlog of prospects that created very loaded rookie classes in 2022, 2023, and 2024. There was an extra year of development in 2021 to get those guys to the big league level, but we've just seen an influx of rookies in the past few seasons. And now I do think across the league, not just talking about teams like the Padres, whose minor league cupboards are barren, but just across the league, prospect rankers have had a very difficult time filling out their top 100 list, getting to the end of those lists. There's probably like 70 prospects or so that are worthy of being on those lists based on, the standards that we've set in recent years. But beyond that, there's a lot of names that you'll see differing from one list to the next just because it comes down to personal preference at that point. There's no real consensus on the bottom 25 prospects in those top 100 lists, and then even beyond that, finding the honorable mentions is extremely difficult. So as a result, you've seen much shorter rookie of the year odds this year on guys like Roki Sasaki and Jason Dominguez because the pools just don't seem nearly as deep for more threats to emerge and potentially challenge them. And as a result, I do think guys who have graduated college more recently, like Christian Moore, who's probably going to get a quick promotion to the big leagues, or Travis Bazzana for the Guardians, who was the number 1 pick overall last year, I think there's a chance that these guys fly through the minors a little bit more quickly because there's not as much competition ahead of them to block them on their path to the major leagues. So yeah, just sort of the COVID reset era has, nearing its end or hit its end in terms of the prospect depth in the minor leagues. And then on top of that too, Major League Baseball slashed, a lot of minor league teams just from participating. They cut a lot of minor league programs. I think there's 1 fewer rookie league out there now. Like there's so many fewer minor league teams in general. There's just fewer prospects getting the opportunity to pop. I think back to a guy like Jeff McNeil, who was a late bloomer for the Mets, but basically like flew through the minor leagues all in 1 year. He changed his swing and rocketed up from double or A ball to the majors all within one season. You're going to get less of these independent ball guys that pop. You're going to get fewer of these late blooming prospects that pop just because teams don't have as many places to put them and let them develop for as long.
So putting aside some of the overview of the entire league and double clicking into leagues themselves, let's start with the NL. You already gave the Dodgers their flowers, but I'm sure there's lots of listeners out there and bettors who have Dodger fatigue. Even when the regular season rolls around, they don't want to lay minus 325 on a Tuesday night game. They want to get into who's next in the pecking order. So who is your favorite team to vie with the Dodgers for the best record in the NL and potentially in terms of an upside, be able to compete with them and in the World Series?
Yeah, the Atlanta Braves, these two teams last year, their composite projection, average projections were basically the same. I had the Braves at 102.6. I had the Dodgers at 102.6. The public projection market actually had the Braves ahead of the Dodgers. They had the Braves at 99.4 and the Dodgers at 98.2. Now, as I said, the Braves lost some guys, Max Fried, Charlie Morton. They have Spencer Strider and Ronald Acuna coming off an injury. It remains to be seen how aggressively they use these guys this year. Their odds for Cy Young and MVP are both north of 30-1 in some places, which are super intriguing. I don't really think Strider gets past 120 innings. I think they'll be a little bit slow bringing Acuna back and probably not let him run nearly as much. So I don't think you're getting a 50-50 season from Acuna again. But just considering, the talent, the high-end talent on these rosters, I think the Braves are pretty close to the Dodgers. And I think by the end of the season, by the time you get to the playoffs and you consolidate to a 25-man roster, I think these teams are very close. Just because the Braves don't have nearly as much depth as the Dodgers do. The other side of that, though, is can the Dodgers make it, or can the Braves make it to October healthy with all their pieces? Can Strider and Acuna and Matt Olson and Ozzie Albies all be healthy come playoff time? Because we haven't seen it yet from them. They won the World Series without Acuna on their roster. He was hurt that year. They've had him back in other seasons, but they've had other pieces missing. Albies is typically not there come October. So it's a very top-heavy roster. It's one that, when everybody's on the field, I think is very comparable to any team in baseball, if not clearly the second best roster in baseball by like 5 wins. But getting all those guys to the end of the season is something I'm a little bit worried about. I think there's World Series and pennant value on the Braves. I'm not even close to the highest projection in the market on them. I believe I have, of 5 or 6 projections I used, I had the 5th highest projection, and I still make them about plus 800 to win the World Series compared to plus 900, 10-1 out there. So definitely value on the Braves looking around the projection market, and definitely the only other team that I think has a chance to be elite this season. I think the Mets, if they add more pieces, if they add a Dylan Cease or a Luis Robert, I think the Mets can jump into that tier. But I basically tiered these teams out for you, Mike. I have the Dodgers listed as historically good or in the God tier. I've only put one other team in potentially elite, and that is the Atlanta Braves. Everybody else I view as a pennant contender. I have like 8 pennant contenders in the AL. There's 2 teams, though, in the NL. I think the Dodgers and the Braves are cut above.
So sticking in the NL East, you already mentioned the Mets. The Phillies also could be a thorn in the side of both the Mets and the Braves. How competitive do you think this is going to be in the NL East? And do you think all 3 teams, clearly the Braves, the answer would be yes to this, but do you think all 3 teams are going to be buyers throughout the season looking to improve? Or do you think there's a certain moment in, let's call it midsummer, where a team like the Phillies, if they're at 500, they have to start to pick their battles a little bit, which years are best to go all in, because this is just a loaded division. You're playing more games against top teams than somebody, say, in the NL Central. So what are your thoughts on the Phillies and Mets potentially shocking the Braves and leapfrogging them to number 1?
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, the value is all in the Braves. The projections have them near 60%, but there's still downside within that. And if one of Acuna or Strider gets hurt again, there's much closer, battle between these rosters than I would expect the math to show coming into the year. And we saw it play out that way last year. Now, in terms of the Phillies, like picking their spots, I think they have a 2-year window left, probably max with this team. Trey Turner's 31, turning 32 this year. Bryce Harper's 32, going to turn 33. Kyle Schwarber's 32. Nick Castellanos is 33. Zach Wheeler's 34, turning 35. Aaron Nola's 31, turning 32. I like their young pitching. I like Sanchez. I like Ranger Suarez. But the stars on this team are starting to age out. And we've seen this team falter in the playoffs. They probably had their best chance to do it 2 years ago when they blew it against the Diamondbacks. I still think they end up winning that World Series against Texas if they advance. The Phillies don't really have the opportunity to sit around and wait. They do need to strengthen this roster as much as they can right now, but they added everything that they could last year to strengthen that bullpen. There's really nowhere to add other than maybe upgrading your left fielder if Max Kepler doesn't work out. There's really nowhere to add a starting caliber player to this lineup. You can add to the bullpen, but the rotation is pretty built out. So the Phillies, to me, don't really have much room to improve their 25-man roster. They're kind of stuck with the guys that they have. The Mets obviously can add and think will add at some point throughout the season. I think Luis Robert is an absolutely perfect fit for them. Center field, the biggest hole on that team. But they've had rotation injuries in spring training too, and I could definitely see them going after a guy like Dylan Cease, who is a high floor innings guy in terms of just providing volume for you across the season and kind of loosening the workload that you have to put on the rest of that rotation. So yeah, I think the Mets likeliest to add of all these teams, maybe of any team in baseball. But I don't really view a big gap between the Mets and the Phillies and teams like the Cubs and the Diamondbacks. I think those 6 teams that I mentioned, the Dodgers, the Braves, Mets, Phillies, Cubs, Diamondbacks, I think that is your NL playoff field. And I basically give any of those teams a realistic shot of winning the pennant. Just the Dodgers are such a difficult force to overcome. In fact, I'd probably look for ways, given how the playoff path might play out, to try to bet teams on the opposite side of the bracket as the Dodgers. And then hopefully whoever ends up playing them can knock them out like the D-backs did a couple of years ago. You're lining your futures up. So you're hoping to get a team to the NLCS playing the Dodgers for the NL pennant. And hopefully the Dodgers have been eliminated by that point. So maybe trying to target teams in the NL bracket who can avoid the Dodgers.
With Major League Baseball right around the corner, now is the perfect time to get yourself an Action Pro account. Get real-time pick alerts from experts like Sean Zerillo, access to Sean Kerner's strikeout prop projections, and more. Right now, new subscribers can get $20 off a year of Action Pro at actionnetwork.com/pro and use promo code POD20. That's promo code POD20 for $20 off an entire year, so you'll be covered for March Madness, NBA, and the upcoming baseball season, plus next college football season and NFL as well. So don't wait. Visit actionnetwork.com/pro right now and use promo code POD20 to get $20 off a year of Action Pro. As I mentioned on the programming front, we're going to go through and break down division by division in the coming weeks, so make sure to keep an eye out for that. For that reason, I'll tee up this last question about the NL in this way. In terms of teams that you listed that you like to be in the wild card hunt, the Giants, the Padres, the Reds, the Brewers, and the Pirates, which one of those do you think have the highest variance, the widest range of outcomes this season? Is it the Pirates because of their payroll issues and the potential for them not to be buyers, which I assume they're not going to be without any real money to throw around? Or is there another team on that list you actually think has a wider outcome?
I think it's the Giants and the Reds. The Reds primarily because public projections hate them. They have them at about 78, 77 wins. Every single public projection out there would recommend betting the under 78.5 on the Reds. I'm closer to 83 wins on this team. I don't really see a huge gap between them and the Cubs. I really love the rotation depth on this team. I like all 5 pitchers that they have in their current starting rotation. And then you factor in, they added Chase Petty in a trade a couple years ago. He's a former first-round pick, but they also drafted Chase Burns high in the first round last year and Rhett Loader high in the first round 2 years ago. Both of these guys are major league ready. So the Reds have substantial pitching depth. They upgraded their bullpen a little bit, and they can basically hit 1 through 9 in their order. They should play better defense than they have in years past. That's basically been the Achilles heel for the Reds the past 5, 7, 10 years. They're always ranked among one of the worst defensive teams in baseball. That is always proven to be one of the quickest ways to improve your win total, is to just improve your team defense. I think they have a chance to be a better defensive team this year. They also added Terry Francona as their manager, and I thought David Bell was one of the most underwhelming managers in recent years as well. Francona, a 3-time AL Manager of the Year. I think he has a chance to win NL Manager of the Year at 7-1, and that's probably a better way to bet the Reds than betting their divisional odds or betting their wild card odds. I think if they make the playoffs, Terry Francona is likely going to get a lot of consideration for NL Manager of the Year. But to the Giants as well, they've been looking for a star for quite some time. They missed out on Bryce Harper, missed out on Arson Judge. There was a third player they missed out on too. I don't remember if it was Trey Turner, but there was another free agent. It wasn't Ohtani that they were in the mix for as well. They did offer Ohtani the same money the Dodgers offered. Weren't able to land him either. So they pushed out Farhan Zaidi, who was not able to land any of those free agents. They allowed Buster Posey to take over as general manager. And when they signed Posey, or when they gave him the role, I initially wanted to make fun of it just because he has no general manager or front office experience anywhere. The guy's just a baseball savant. I watched him in college, watched him play all 9 positions. I was at his Golden Spikes presentation ceremony. I was volunteering at the place when they gave that out to him. So I've been following Buster Posey's career since he was 21, 22. He's just a baseball genius, and I trust what he's doing. And he clearly has a relationship with current players and the ability to connect with them, because he was finally able to get them over the hump in terms of signing stars. Got Willy Adames on that roster. Say what you will about Justin Verlander at this point in his career, but I've seen videos of him working with guys like Hayden Birdsong and teaching them new pitch grips. You can't put a number on the value of bringing in a guy like Verlander, who's essentially like an extra pitching coach for your pitching staff. So I think the Giants are finally poised to potentially take a step back up this year. I know they had that surprising 100-plus win season a few years ago, but I actually like the roster build they have for 2025. And I think a guy like Bryce Eldridge, too, it's 100-1 for Rookie of the Year. He's 20 years old, but they have him playing in spring training. They're going to give opportunities to young players to potentially come up and contribute to this roster, because they're just continuing to look for offensive talent wherever they can find it. They have plenty of pitching. I like their bullpen. I like their rotation. And adding Adames to the offensive mix, giving an elite left side of the infield to Logan Webb, the roster all fits together. Everything they're doing sort of makes sense. The math doesn't really have them better than a 500 team right now, but if this team wins 87 games, gets into a wild card spot, hops the Padres, I won't be surprised at all.
Now, turning to the AL, it may be easier to look at teams that you don't have in the pennant contention list, because it is a clown car of teams. So I'll ask you this. Of the teams that you listed off that we were discussing before we hopped on the pod, which are you more bullish on than the market in terms of your projections?
I would definitely say the Rays, in terms of like their ability to do something if they make it at the end. The AL East is so tough. All 5 teams can go 500 or better. All 5 teams are capable of winning division. If you look at other projections out there, the Rays, the Blue Jays could actually be value bets to win the AL East. I prefer the Rays in terms of actually being a contender as opposed to the Blue Jays. I think the Rays actually may even be significantly undervalued compared to the Red Sox. At this point, the Red Sox have moved up 2-3 wins after all their offseason additions. The Rays were a team I was targeting last year, and they didn't quite make it there. They didn't get all the guys back they needed to in time by the end of the season, but they should be poised for 2025 to have a much better roster. Shane McClanahan coming back into the mix, should get a full season of Junior Caminero. Josh Lowe was banged up all last year. I think he should be much better. Brandon Lau was banged up all last year. I think, he's a guy who can certainly contribute for them. Drew Rasmussen is your number 5, number 6 starter. It's a guy with significant upside. So there's just a lot of blue chippers potentially on this Rays roster. I'm not sure if they have the depth that they've had in years past, though. Typically, the Rays excel at winning 85-plus games by just grinding you down with their 40-man roster. No bad replacements on the team. Every time anybody gets hurt, they're able to replace them with a league average major league player. I'm not sure if they have the depth necessarily that they've had in years past, but they do have some interesting prospects coming. The question is whether they arrive in 2025 or 2026. Guys like Carson Williams, who's going to take over the shortstop role for them, have a chance to be stars. Xavier Isaac, first base prospect they drafted. He was injured when they drafted him. He may make it to the big leagues as early as 2026 and actually provide like a legitimate 30-plus home run bat in the middle of the order, which is something the Rays really haven't had for the entire history of their franchise, other than Carlos Pena for a brief time. So I do think the Rays are a team on the way up, certainly in the American League. I'd say the Tigers, the Rangers, there's one of the Red Sox as well. I think those teams are all sort of trending in the right direction. The American League Central in particular, the Twins didn't add anything really this offseason. They added Harrison Bader, added some minor pieces. They have a pretty good roster. I like what they have going, but the Tigers added a little bit. The Royals, the Guardians, neither of those teams really added anything. The Royals added last year. So The Tigers, to me, are the only team trying to improve in the AL Central. The Astros sort of shuffled pieces in and out. You lose Kyle Tucker, you lose Alex Bregman. It's losing the identity that they've had for the past decade there. But you replace them with Christian Walker, Isaac Paredes. They have prospects coming up. I think the Astros can continue to sort of be where they were last year. I still think they're trending down just because they moved away from the analytics side of their organization. No James Click, no AJ Hinch anymore. They're letting Jeff Bagwell run things. I'm expecting the Astros implosion to happen at some point. Just not sure if it happens in 2025. I don't like their rotation depth, though, this year nearly as much as I have in years past. And the Mariners did absolutely nothing this offseason, too. So the Rangers, the Tigers, these are teams who are actually trying to improve, trying to get better. I think the Rays are poised to take a step up. I think the Red Sox made active moves to get better. The other team I should mention, the Baltimore Orioles, projections were really high in them last year. I bet their win total under. They lost Corbin Burns, but they replaced them with guys like Charlie Morton. They brought over Sugano from Japan, who was one of the best pitchers in Japan for quite a number of years. Not sure how effective he's going to be at the MLB level, but I do think the Orioles are sort of going overlooked this year. They were the buzz team last year. They jumped up out of nowhere 2 years ago, had a lot of like World Series hype and stuff last year, and now nobody cares about them anymore. And I think the Orioles are kind of flying under the radar. I like them to win the AL East at 3-1. Don't really like their futures quite as much, just because I don't think their pitching is high caliber enough for October. But I do feel like they're the team everybody's sort of sleeping on in the American League when everybody loved them last year. It sort of reminds me of the Blue Jays from a few years ago. There was the year where the Blue Jays were like the favorite in the AL East. They underperformed. Next year, nobody cared about them, and it's sort of dwindled since, the interest in that Blue Jays team over time. I hope the Orioles are able to figure it out for the sake of their fans. But I do feel like the hype is substantially lower than it was last year.
And when it comes to Major League Baseball compared to the NBA, the NFL, you tank, and sometimes you can get a transformational player. You can get a Peyton Manning, an Andrew Luck, a Joe Burrow. All of a sudden, in a year, you're a competitive team. You're at 500. Maybe you're vying for the playoffs. NBA, same thing. You win that draft lottery, the lotto ball goes your way, and all of a sudden you have a guy like Cooper Flagg in this upcoming NBA draft. Could change the fate of an entire franchise. That is not how it works in Major League Baseball. It is not instant gratification. Turn around, all of a sudden you have an ace or the best power hitter in your division in an 18-month process from draft day to putting him out in the lineup. So where do the White Sox turn? Because you talked a lot about these teams actively trying to improve and having prospects and having certain elements to their roster that you can point to as a bright spot. I'm at a loss for how bad this team is. And I think it's going to be an interesting thing to discuss from a gambling perspective, because can we start getting creative about how we fade a team like this on a nightly basis? You don't want to take those, necessarily those long odds for them to win, but maybe just fading them and rolling the money over and hoping for those 6, 7, 10 game losing streaks. Maybe that's one way to approach it. How do you view them purely through a gambling lens? Because essentially they're weaponless headed into the season. Am I wrong?
Yeah, Colin Whitchurch, who's our former MLB editor and our resident Chicago White Sox fan, he'll be on the AL Central preview with me, but he thinks there's a chance the team is worse than the one that they put on the field last year. He thinks the roster is worse. No Eric Fede, who was probably their best pitcher last season. Hopefully you get more time for Luis Robert, but there's a chance they trade him, at some point soon. And then you're really looking at a roster where you're like struggling to find who's going to be their all-star come midseason, because every team has to get an all-star. Right now, it's clearly Luis Robert, but if Luis Robert is not on the roster, I have no idea who you pick from this team. There's a couple of young pitchers I like, Sean Burke, Jonathan Cannon. I think these guys can continue to improve. Davis Martin, I think, has some interesting skills as well. It's a much younger team with actual pieces that you could see being part of their next competitive team compared to an older team, talentless team with vets and minor league non-roster invitees like Paul DeYoung getting significant at-bats. So at least there are some pieces on this team that you could see being a part of the White Sox next competitive team. I'd expect Corey Lee to eventually get moved out. Caro, Kyle Teal, who they traded for in the Garrett Crochet trade, they'll end up getting time at catcher. They're probably going to give Colson Montgomery a long look at shortstop. He's one of their top prospects, hit a ball really hard in spring training the other day. He's long odds to win AL MVP. Win AL Rookie of the Year. He's going to get a lot of playing time at a premium position. The projections don't love him to clear more than about 1 or 1.5 wins. But yeah, overall, I'm at about 54 wins on the White Sox. The entire projection market has them winning 60 games or more. I don't see it at all. I really don't. I think even that 11, 12 win improvement over last season would feel like a miracle. I don't see how they win 20 more games than they won last year. They did underachieve compared to their Pythagorean win record by about 7 wins. I think they finished with 40 or 41 actual wins, maybe 39. But their Pythag had 48 wins on it. If this team wins about 50 games, that's roughly what I'm expecting. And it's roughly where I projected it. That's roughly what they should have done last season. So I think about 50 to 55 wins is fair for the White Sox. I do not see them getting to 60 like every other projection out there would. Their win total opened at 51.5. It's come up to 53.5. I wasn't interested in betting it at 51.5. I'm obviously still not now. Now, in terms of how to bet them in season, there are going to be guys like, as I said, Sean Burke, Jonathan Cannon, who I'm interested in betting on, or maybe betting the under in those games, because I think this team is going to continue to really struggle to score runs. There were so many games last year where I had the over and they're losing like 7-0, 8-0, and I just need them to score 1 run in order to catch the over, and they couldn't do it. And I really don't think there's much power in this offense at all, or just much offensive upside in general from this team. So probably looking to unders again for the White Sox in 2026. I think they could be a good under team just because the pitching might be a little bit better than it was last year, but the offense doesn't look like it will be.
From a team that you're not sprinting to the window to bet on to one that maybe you're a little bit more interested in. I love that hitting me with the doc before we got onto the show. I get to see behind the curtain all these things that are running through your mind. The one that caught my eye, the Oakland A's, or soon to be not Oakland A's, offense and their overs in a boosted home environment. Talk to me about the ballpark factors and how it impacts the A's this season.
Yeah, the A's old park, obviously had the gigantic foul territory, which would lead to extra pop-up outs for pitchers. There was a period of time where they were going out of their way to acquire pitchers who had high pop-up rates like Mike Fiers, could just generate outs in foul territory, free outs, which are just as good as strikeouts. There's no difference effectively between a pop-out to the catcher and a strikeout, right? But now they're going to a minor league park with smaller dimensions, with less foul territory, but also significantly warmer temperatures. They're no longer playing in the Bay Area where they would typically get the cooler temperatures at night, the wind, very light or neutral in terms of like the weather, cooler temperatures in the 70s, 60s, even throughout the summer in the evening. Playing in Sacramento, from my understanding, much drier, much more humid, and much warmer. And that's going to lead to increased offense in those games. As a result, would not draft A's pitchers in terms of fantasy. Not that there were many you would want to draft anyway, but I would really upgrade all of their hitters in fantasy rankings this year. And I think just in general, they could score a bunch of runs. This was one of the most exciting and best offenses in baseball over the final stretch of the season. I believe they ranked top 10 in weighted runs created plus in the second half. They were demolishing the baseball. Lawrence Butler, probably the key contributor amongst them, but this is a very deep lineup. Even Jacob Wilson, who's projected to be their 9-hitter this year, blew through the minor leagues, has a very high contact rate, isn't going to barrel many baseballs, not going to hit for a ton of power, but he could be a 300-plus hitter. I think he's an AL Rookie of the Year candidate, and he's their 9-hitter. This is a very deep lineup with a lot of upside and a lot of talent. I think Brent Rooker is actually a sneaky home run leader bet this year, considering with this new park. I think there's an outside chance he could cross 45, get to maybe even 50-plus home runs. So Brent Rooker, legitimate in terms of the skill set from what we've seen in recent past. I believe he signed an extension with the A's, and their pitching staff should be a little bit better this year too. I know I just talked about, fading their pitchers, et cetera, in this new park, but they signed Luis Severino. They've added some other pieces. I do think the A's are trending towards wild card contender. Maybe not this year though, maybe probably for next year, but mathematically, there is some value on them to make the playoffs in 2025. And if they play much better with this new park that kind of gels with their team fit, I don't think you should be shocked, because we see teams like the Orioles, move in their left field fence again. The Orioles are not as good of a pitching team as they had last year. They leaned into their offense a little bit again for 2025. I think the A's are just sort of getting a fortunate timing of when they're moving parks here and going to Sacramento, because they happen to have a very good, young, fun offense that's going to play in a boosted home environment.
You mentioned two ballparks, both what the A's will be playing in and the Orioles in Camden Yards. There was a third on that list. Talk to me about Rays Park and the differences that we can expect this season.
Yeah, the Rays are going to be playing in Steinbrenner Field, which is the Yankees' home park in Florida. It has identical dimensions to Yankee Stadium. It's about 10 feet shorter to right field in Steinbrenner Field than it was in the Trop, but also you're going from playing inside to playing outside, and you're going from playing in climate-controlled environment to warm temperatures in Florida over the summer. So again, another park that is going to be smaller and going to have way better offensive weather for 2025 than they've seen in years past. I think this not only helps the Rays, this helps all of the teams in the American League East in terms of their run scoring for this season. Legitimately, so the Tropicana Field played about 93% of the Major League run scoring environment. You can get that closer to 90%, but effectively, a total that would be 9 at Yankee Stadium would have been 8 at the Trop, or around there, 8.25. Now you're going to get about an extra run per game in these Rays home games, about 81 runs over the course of the year, which is pretty substantial over the course of a season. So keep an eye on the Rays overs, the A's overs, the Camden Yards overs as we get a little bit more into the season. And then particularly, even as we get into the summer, once temperatures warm up a little bit, I think the ball might really fly in these parks. And I think you're going to see teams you're not, particularly in the Rays case, like a team you're usually looking at as a run suppression team. I think they may be in a few more slugfests this year.
Let's close things out by discussing ABS, not another federal bureau that's getting eliminated by the Trump administration. No, this is the automated ball strike systems. It's been used in spring training. I just want to hear your overall thoughts as, I don't know if I should put this term on you, a baseball purist. Is there the human element of it? Would you like to keep it, or do you just care about getting it right 100% of the time? Because it seems a little bit wonky in terms of showing up the umpire, but in some cases, these pitches are so far outside of the zone, and it has a huge impact. It can kill, a rally. It can, bail a pitcher out depending on the call. So what are your thoughts on this technology? And do you think we're headed towards a future, if this is successful in spring training, that there's going to be enough of a groundswell of support to push this into the regular season and postseason moving forward?
I do. I think it'll be here in 2026. I think the spring training testing is just preliminarily in a check the box function, but I do think we will see it implemented next year. I do think it ultimately benefits hitters as opposed to pitchers. I think pitchers benefit from pitch framing, getting, calls that are incorrect switched in their favor more than hitters do. I think also once teams are not reliant upon pitch framing catchers being behind the dish for defensive purposes, and you're getting an automated strike zone that's the same for everybody, you're able to put more of a bopper who's not defensive oriented behind the dish. So not only are pitchers going to get fewer calls, they're also going to be facing deeper lineups that have more of an offensive oriented catcher in them, effectively a second DH. You just need to be able to throw out runners moving between first and second base, having a good throwing arm. You don't need to be able to pitch frame anymore. So it's going to change the position a little bit. It's going to change the sport a little bit. It's also going to change the strike zone a little bit, because the ABS systems are going to be standardized, but they're going to call certain pitch types consistently that we may not view as strikes, or that we may view as strikes. It may not give you the call. I'm talking more so about those three-dimensional breaking balls that kind of break in through the top of the zone and start above where the strike zone ends, but because the strike zone is three-dimensional, it may cut through the back edge of the zone, right? And the ABS system may call those strikes. It may not call them strikes. I'm not sure whether it has a tendency to have a bias towards high or low strikes. But that said, the general strike zone is going to change, and you're going to see pitchers pitch differently. You're going to see hitters train differently and focus on gamifying the zone a little bit more and attacking zones where they think they can do damage, because the ABS system is telling them that X is going to be a strike, so you should probably swing at Y. So yeah, I just think it's going to change the dynamics of the pitcher-hitter interaction a little bit. And I think it's going to change the need to have a defensive catcher behind the plate, eliminate that need essentially, other than having a good throwing arm. But I do like to see it implemented. I do want to get the calls right ultimately, I think it's worth pointing out the impact that it's going to have and the likely increased offense that it's going to have on the overall sport.
That'll do it for us here on Payoff Pitch for our 2025 Major League Baseball offseason update episode. This is hopefully just whetting your appetite for more content in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out for our divisional previews coming soon. Opening day right around the corner, which also means that you should be subscribing, rating, and reviewing this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. It helps us spread the word. Also, check out our Action Network app and the Action Network Discord channel. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Payoff Pitch from Action Network.